Welcome to our webinar on materials management. My name is Tanya Stockbridge. I'm going to be your host today. We're just going to go ahead and start quickly on logistics. So before we get things started, I just want to go over a few logistics. Please note that due to the large number of people we have on the call, the audio today is muted. Please use the question box to the right of your screens if you have a question. If we're unable to get to your question, we'll make sure to note everything down and get you an answer when the webinar is over. Also, we're going to be recording today's session. A recorded copy is going to be made available to you on request, and we'll also be loading that up to our website in the next couple of days. So before we get things started, just a little bit about who is TradeStone and what do we do. TradeStone helps retailers and suppliers increase market share and improve margins through the use of merchandise lifecycle management solutions that unify the design, sourcing, ordering, and delivery of their private label and branded goods. As you can see, we work with top-tier retailers, helping them forecast and manage what they're going to need. They represent category leaders and hundreds of brands, both private label and global. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our Senior Vice President of Sales and Marketing, Chris Morrison.
Thanks, Tanya, and thanks everyone for making time for the call this morning. We greatly appreciate it. We're just going to go through at a fairly high level our materials management solution that we recently launched and just give you an overview of what the problem is the solution solves, what capabilities are available with it, and then some further information that we'd be happy to follow up with you down the road. So certainly with regards to materials, it's been an interesting past 18 to 24 months. We've seen material prices go up, go down with a high degree of variability, really across all of the different categories of materials. At the same time, we've seen challenges with availability and certainly shifting demands from country to country and challenges across the board, both in terms of cost and availability, which is making it interesting for both our retail customers and certainly for all the end consumers as well. From an impression perspective, certainly consumers are seeing these material prices fluctuate, and they're wondering how that's going to impact their final goods as well. So it's been an interesting 18 to 24 months with regards to materials. At the same time, many retailers continue to have challenges with new product launches. This was a great article recently delivered by Gartner just a couple weeks back. And their finding was that 30% of new products are really considered successful product launches. And in the areas that they aren't successful, there's generally three categories of reasons why they feel that the product launch has not been successful. The first of which is product cost issues. The second of which is inaccurate demand. And the third being either inventory shortages or product availability issues. In all three of those cases, materials play an often very critical and often very underserved role, whether it's the cost of material, the availability of the material, or simply the timeline to develop and execute new materials for sale. So if you look at materials management, it really becomes a balancing act. And if anything else, this is probably heightened fairly dramatically with the variability in material costs over the past 18 to 24 months. And really becomes a balancing act between understanding consumer demand, what the consumer is willing to pay, what they're willing to spend, balancing that between both cost and availability. And so this, either the role or the function within most retail organizations has kind of increased in importance over the past 18 to 24 months. At the same time, we found that the function and the business process behind it is often underdeveloped for many of our customers. So what we found from the challenges in managing materials, again, each retailer looks a little bit different. Each has a little bit different process, but in general, we find a similar flow and some similar characteristics from company to company. Generally, in the design phase, there's some level of a material library, some level of consistency across the organizations trying to be created around raw materials. In the development phase, there's a level of specification materials, whether they're new or reused, and also developing samples. Through that, then the sourcing process, in some cases, there's a lot of effort placed around understanding raw material costs. In other cases, there isn't. Some companies are actually taking this down to the level of pre-ordering materials and going all the way through a sourcing process just for raw materials itself. But again, many companies are trying to understand then their commitment, their consumption, and their liability. And even if they aren't necessarily buying materials directly, they're certainly trying to do this for their supply base and understand, particularly on the liability side, what their overall supply chain is carrying with regards to materials. and then placing orders. Again, whether that's strictly raw material purchase or obviously final finished goods for sale as well. This tends to be the general process that we find. What we have seen from a trends perspective is that there tends to be limited visibility across these silos, and for the most part, it tends to be very driven by both email and Excel for many of the folks out there that we've been talking with. We do tend to find some inconsistency in material attributes across the organization. Again, oftentimes there's material libraries that are kept in Excel or multiple versions of information out there. Oftentimes the decision process around making trade-offs really in almost a near real-time basis between design, cost, and quality trade-offs, and then trying to factor in availability often becomes cumbersome for many retailers. And then also to try and roll up across multiple departments, multiple classes, and even more so across divisions and banners to understand the commitment, consumption, liabilities for the business, but also to understand the cost impacts as material prices change or availability changes, even down to an IMU level. And then finally being able to understand this really in real time and manage that for the business. So again, these are some of the common themes that we see out there, common challenges, and why we decided to build a solution around this particular area. So what TradeStone has launched is what we call our materials management solution, which allows you to respond more quickly to consumer demand and reduce your overall risk by enabling you to project, negotiate, order, track, and analyze material commitments and consumption across the entire business. And one caveat on this is that we certainly recognize that not every company out there is purchasing at a raw material level, is ordering at a raw material level, and we still find that those companies see tremendous value in this, being able to get consistency across the business, being able to analyze material consumption for their supply chain, to be able to understand material cost impact on finished goods. So whether you're taking this all the way down to the material level or not, we found that there's value in the solution in both cases. So we do recognize not every retailer takes us down to the specific purchasing of raw materials. So what does the world look like with our TradeStone solution? Again, we start in a similar process, but again, this is really working off of a common version of the truth in the center. So we're really capturing at a critical level the data required to support this, the calendaring and the workflow required to support this, and the timelines to be able to execute against the development cycle with a specific emphasis on raw materials. So we're starting with this one version of truth versus having information in multiple spreadsheets, out with vendors, or also in emails. Really starting with that one version of truth and being able to build the workflow around that. Again, we're starting with consumer trends, being able to understand history, being able to understand performance in the past, getting to an enterprise material library that takes us down to the specific material level, and also being able to have an approval workflow across the entire organization so that there's consistency and uniformity across the business. Driving that then to be able to understand at a product development level the materials that you want to pursue, and then to be able to develop samples and managing the entire sampling process. The ability then to be able to either source at a raw material level or to understand the impact of raw materials on a finished good as well, and then to be able to roll that up at any point in the hierarchy into material cost impact at an IMU level. And so being able to understand that both down to an item level, all the way up across class and department, and then spanning across divisions or even brands as well inside of an entire organization to see a company level roll up. And then to be able to see that really in real time and to be able to look at that both in terms of specific raw materials, specific suppliers, specific items, be able to understand both the commitment, the consumption, and the liability that the business is carrying around specific materials. And as an example, one of the more critical pieces of information that comes out of this beyond the workflow and just the overall managing of the process is some of the analytics and analysis that you can get at the touch of a button around material consumption. So this report is really one of our favorites in here. That's called our Material Consumption Analysis Report. And what this is showing is an ability to understand at a material level across divisions what the projections are, what the commitments are, and what the liabilities are down to a pretty specific level. So across the top, you have the different divisions, you have the different brands, you have the different materials that are being consumed. And so you're able to understand that cross-division, cross-department, what's being consumed and how you can get to a consistent level of material accuracy, understanding what the specific type of material is, and then more interestingly, being able to understand what the commitment is, what the projections are, and the consumption, and ultimately liability to the business across the board. So as an example, to drill down with our handy magnifying glass here, is to understand particularly, for example, potential liability. So this is looking at both open quantity in terms of units, whether that's yards or whatever square foot, whatever it might be that you're measuring against, an open amount in terms of dollars, and then really a final utilization time period when you're expecting that ultimately to be consumed. And so you're able to drill down to that specific level, even down to a specific material, and then being able to do that across the entire business, giving that level of analytics. So then what are the benefits of the solution? Again, from a flow perspective, we're starting off with consumer trends. We're enabling designers and product developers to be able to balance those trends, cost, and availability. We're then being able to quickly source materials and in some cases be able to get early season feedback, be able to do smaller runs, to be able to get feedback, and then to be able to understand how quickly you can chase the trend. The end result then is being able to get the more on-trend merchandise, which obviously leads to higher sales and potentially reduce markdowns as well. And while that's very much focused on the sales side, behind that as well is really the controls in place to manage costs, not necessarily always reducing costs, but at least keeping costs in check as variability happens. And then being able to manage risk across the entire supply chain so you understand your liabilities as well. So the ultimate benefits with this are being able to get to a more agile, demand-driven supply chain, to be able to take this down and be able to negotiate price and have visibility down to specific factories and specific mills, to be able to shorten the time to market by pre-positioning raw materials and to be able to adjust in season, to be able to significantly reduce liabilities by tracking consumption, and ultimately giving greater visibility, and as inflationary pressures continue to kind of ebb and flow, to be able to manage that on a more real-time basis. So why TradeStone Materials Management? Again, to sum up, we really feel that this is helping another way to help bridge between consumer demand and the supply chain. So being able to do that balancing between consumer demand, cost, and availability to assure efficient speed to market. The solution itself is holistic. It provides everything from libraries through the sourcing and sampling process, all the way through being able to manage that to the end order. In the meantime, being able to do real-time collaboration with both your vendors and all the way down to the mills if necessary as well, and getting that level of visibility both to cost and to availability on a real-time basis. From a financial perspective, this helps you manage risk and liabilities. And from a software perspective, this can both be installed standalone, so without the rest of the TradeStone suite, in other words, sitting on top of legacy systems, or as part of the TradeStone suite as well. Either way, we've designed it so that there's benefit to the business depending if you're already a TradeStone customer or just looking to do this as a standalone solution. And from a deployment perspective, this has been architected to be live very quickly from about 12 weeks. It's a very quick time to value and quick ROI project as well. So in summary, we feel that materials management really can help make retailers more demand-driven, more responsive to consumer demand. And so one final thought on this as well is that Wall Street agrees. We had a nice quote from Deb Weinswig at Citi, and her quote was that the practice of pre-positioning fabric, for example, is one of the practices that can be enabled by a solution like this. It can help reduce lead time by 30 to 40 days, allowing retailers to get to market faster and increasing the chance of full price sales. We see TradeStone software as one of the leaders in MLM technology and implementation. Again, a great quote from Deb, and we certainly always appreciate her comments. So with that, I think I'll turn it back to Tanya for some final thoughts and open it up to any questions.
Great. Thanks very much, Chris. So if anybody has any questions, we definitely encourage you to visit our website to read more on our materials management solution. You can also contact us at marketing@tradestonesoftware.com, and we'd be happy to set up a meeting to discuss your materials management needs. Feel free to call the office, speak to someone directly. Our phone number is 978-281-3723. You can go ahead and ask for myself, Tanya Stockbridge. I'm the Director of Marketing, and I'll make sure you get in touch with the right person. And also, we, of course, encourage you to follow our news on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. So without further ado, we have had some questions coming in, so if you give us just a minute, we're going to sort through. And please feel free to ask any questions, and we'll make sure we get to them. So give us just 1 minute. Okay, we're going to go ahead and start with our first question, which is really what makes TradeStone solution different from other offerings that are out in the market from competitors. So Chris, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Yeah, I think, from a competitive perspective, obviously this we feel is a holistic solution that really lets you manage both kind of the development side of the process, but also the sourcing side and ordering side as well. And so that ability to not only create those libraries, but to be able to extend that all the way out into more of the supply chain, I think is one of the primary benefits that we've seen, is to be able to really run a full process with it. I think the other side, too, is just the collaboration capabilities that can take this down to being able to collaborate both around cost and availability, really down to the mill, if that's something that's important to the business. I think it's both that ability to be able to run an entire holistic process, but then be able to collaborate as well.
Great. Thanks. Our next question is it important to have a good sourcing process in place before moving forward with materials management?
So in general, what we've seen with this is that, oftentimes there may be specific materials teams that are responsible for managing certain phases of the material process. So that certainly is a case that we've seen. So that, to some degree, you can implement separately. We also have seen that this becomes an integral part of the sourcing process and often front ends it. So it's definitely something that can be implemented while you're improving the sourcing process. It doesn't necessarily have to have a fully robust sourcing process in place with a tool in place to be able to do this. So it is something that you can definitely run in parallel or one or the other, depending on your phasing.
Great. Okay, so the next question is, does the system interface with SAP?
Yeah, it does. We've done installations on top of SAP. The solution itself is based on web services. So we have common web services for all of the touch points that would be needed for a system like this. In some cases, we're acting as a system of record around purchase orders. In other cases, it's residing in a system like an SAP. Either case, the system is able to handle that scenario. In the case where we're sitting on top of legacy systems, there are web services around things like orders, around item information. So it really depends on where that information is being kept. But the system is then architected to be able to pass information easily with legacy systems.
Great. All right, so our next question is there a benefit of materials management if my vendor structure is not ready or able to collaborate?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we find that, in often cases, a lot of the collaboration happening with the vendor base is through email and Excel. And we found fairly good adoption pretty quickly with our solution with getting vendors on board. I mean, there's always going to be a set of vendors that may not use a solution like this because of their technical limitations on their side. But certainly we've seen very healthy adoption with our customer base, being able to bring vendors up pretty quickly on this. The question around vendor structure is we've worked in situations where you're primarily dealing with an agent who then is dealing with suppliers or mills directly, or in other cases you may be sourcing directly from a specific vendor or mill. In either case, we've dealt with that type of situation. The hierarchy, if you will, is set up to be able to handle both an agent to and vendor structure as well. So it is something that we've had to deal with in the past, and something that should not prevent any issues with this as well.
Okay, so then the next question is, can we explain how the solution would address early buy situation?
Sure. So some of this is, some of the benefit of the system then is just being able to reduce lead time. So it does give you a little more flexibility if you're coming off of, say, a year-long lead time or a 9-month lead time. But this is able to, particularly in areas like reduced number of samples and reduced processes around getting quotes back and forth, being able to reduce some of the lead time, so being able to buy a little bit earlier, to be able to get an earlier read, and then to be able to make adjustments in season as well. So it does support kind of an early procurement model. The other thing that it does is it really helps bring multiple teams within a business together to understand the requirements kind of at a brand level. So in that sense, you're able to rationalize across multiple types of materials you may be looking at, and in that case, you're able to get a read a little bit earlier in the season by having multiple teams really get to a certain level of agreement on what the materials are going to be. And probably the biggest win with that is getting to a level of internal collaboration. Again, if you look at just the sheer amount of time it can take to go back and forth on a lot of this, by having this information centralized and having a common way of communicating with it both internally and also with the customer base, you're able to reduce a number of weeks out of the cycle, which helps you be a little bit more responsive earlier on in the season.
Great, and I think we're done with about 5 minutes to spare. If anybody else has any questions, feel free to, like I said, send us an email, contact us directly. But we appreciate everybody taking the time today. We wanted to keep it nice and brief for you because I know everybody's busy. But please feel free to contact us if you need anything. And as always, we encourage you to visit our website. Once again, that's www.tradestonesoftware.com. And thanks again, Chris, for taking us through everything today. And we hope everybody has a great rest of the day. Thanks very much.